I want to show you how to make a snowflake postcard. I dug into my scraps for this and I used all materials that I had at home. I started pulling out all the strings that were leftover cuttings from other projects. I grabbed a piece of embroidery stabilizer, but you can also use a piece of cotton batting, and I'm going to layer those two together. And now I have just some strips of white fabric. These are about a ½ inch by about 4 inches tall, and they don't have any stabilizer on them or fusible on them. They are ready to, I'm just laying them on as they are. So let me find my buttonhole stitch. It is, let's see, on my handy quilter stitch 710, it is number 39, and I'm going to take it to 3 millimeters wide and 3 millimeters tall. Again, no stabilizer. I'm doing this raw edge right over top, and it's all very loose, just free motion. It's kind of just all slapped together and really simple and fun. So let me press start. Turn it. I'm using a white thread. It is called Master Quilter. It's a polyester thread. Get that corner in. I am using a thread that I normally machine quilt with. It's kind of thin, but it has a little bit of a sheen to it. Turn that corner. And turn the last corner, and I'm just going to use it to make the stay stitch here. The locking stitch, and I'll press the scissors on the machine. So I have one strip of my snowflake pressed across, stitched across, and I'm going to lay one out here across it, stitch it the same way, and I'm going to start making the diagonals. I'm going to stitch one at a time, just adding on as I go, and the fact that they're not perfectly straight and perfectly centered adds to the folkiness of this. So here's another one that I've already done all of the stitching on. So I'm getting ready to trim it and get it fused to my postcard. I put this aside. So to fuse this all together, I can rip some of the stabilizer off the back, or I can leave it. It doesn't actually matter. It's not going to change much. So let me rip some of the edges off. Since I'm going to stitch everything down, I could have left the stabilizer, but if I have it, I remove it. So here is a string scrap piece sewn together with a snowflake over the top. Get rid of my excess stabilizer. And now I have a piece of double-sided Peltex. It's double-sided fusible Peltex. And I have a piece of plain old white fabric. I'm going to press the white fabric out here, making sure that there are no threads or anything stuck in, because they will show through the back side of the postcard. The white fabric is about 6 inches by 5 inches, 6.5 by 5.5, something like that. And I just lay it over top of the fabric. And I'm going to take my snowflake, and there's enough wiggle room on here that I can decide, do I want the snowflake centered? Do I want it offset? It can be larger, it can be cut off on the side. It's entirely up to you. So I'm going to take my iron and fuse this all together. So I just have to let the heat go through. Then I can turn it over and fuse it from the other side just to be sure. Let me get my cutting board. So now that it's all fused together, you can use any ruler you have and trim it down to 4.5 by 4¼ by 5½ inches, which is the size of a standard postcard. It is 1/4 of a sheet of 8½ by 11 paper. I actually have a postcard trimming tool, so it gives me where the centers are if I want to center it, and it's the right measurement. Because when I take a ruler with lines on it to my piece, I can never remember what's half of 4¼ on the fly. So I just took the math out of it. And on my postcard, I am going to center this snowflake. So let me just trim the edges off. I can recenter it here. Keep trimming the edges. And one last time. So I have it trimmed down to the size of a postcard, and it's ready for me to write on the back of it. But first I'm going to do some edge stitching on here. Let me change my thread out. If your machine does not have a stand to put cones on, you can buy an external cone stand. This one happens to be from Superior, but there are many on the market. And this way you can use a wider variety of threads. I am a long arm quilter, so I do have tons of threads on cones. The one I'm using now is called Fabulux. It is named Blue Heaven, and it's all different shades of blue together, which I think it'll make a nice background stitching on here. So I'm just going to thread it up and bring it over my sewing machine here. I haven't changed my bobbin because I have a Deco Bob white bobbin. It's an 80 weight polyester that's working invisibly inside the postcard now on the back of the snowflake, which we can no longer see. And now it will be invisible in the zigzag stitch, the satin stitch that I'm doing around the edging. And the reason I can make it invisible is I'm going to take my tension down to 0 so that all the top thread is going to stitch around the front and all the way around to the back. So it'll be covered with blue thread on the front and back and you won't see the bobbin. So let me pull up a zigzag stitch, and I'm going to make this 4½ millimeters wide. And I'm going to take this down to 0.4 millimeters stitch, so a pretty short stitch. And let me just start stitching. So I can let the machine feed it by itself, but I'm giving it just a little bit of a push here. I don't want to push it so much that it elongates the stitches, but just to encourage it to go through. Now when I get to the corner, I'm not taking the card out, I'm not making a knot, I'm just going to turn. The end of that one, do side 3. I'm careful while I'm stitching that my stitch on the right side, on the inside of my sewing machine, is actually off of the postcard because I don't want the zigzag to go through the stabilizer. I want it to wrap around. Finished with that side. So I'm going to take my last stitch with a lock stitch and cut the thread. If you can see around the back, it's very blue around the back and it's very blue around the front, and my postcard is ready for me to write season's greeting, happy holidays, happy birthday, thank you, whatever you might need a snowflake gift card for, a postcard for. I do put these in little cellophane envelopes to mail so that they can get to the recipient safely. If you'd like to buy any of these supplies or any postcard supplies, go to DebbieBrownQuilts.com, go to the left side of the page and click on postcard supplies. Happy stitching!